I'm a little concerned about the smack talk. Oh, no.
Camera's over
My
there.
doctor knows.
Is it right there? Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, we need a red light.
The kill button.
All right, we will go ahead and start. Welcome to the COVID-19 Financial Oversight Committee meeting for Wednesday, August 25th. We will jump right into the agenda, and really the first section should be pretty fast, but I'll take any questions. As a follow-up to last week, we looked at the department spending we're going back to CARES Act, our Coronavirus Relief Fund, for what we're reporting. So we saw it from a department perspective. What I've sent earlier today was actually the OIG report, and the hard copy that I just passed out is more of a by expense nature. So I'll walk you through the OIG because that is pretty fluid, and even the department report and this cumulative by expense description, the reason I call it fluid is because we continue to identify expenses that were incurred that will be eligible for FEMA reimbursement. And so as those filings are made with FEMA and we get not all the way to obligated, but at least some initial clearance that those are going to be accepted by FEMA, we then transfer expenditures out of the COVID fund into what we have like this FEMA fund. And then we make more entries to the U.S. Treasury report. So what I mean by that is look at the, I sent it in the email, and the summary page was contracts over $50,000. So for every contract over $50,000, we had to report that. What you find in the pages past that are the different vendors who had those contracts and the amount of expenditure. A good kind of visualization of what I'm talking about is if you look at column B, it says current expenditures. This was the report from April 1st to June 30th, and we actually had negative expenditures. Well, we didn't unspend the money. We transferred it into our FEMA fund because we've identified it as eligible for FEMA. So that's going to continue to happen over the next 3-6 months as we continue to make FEMA claims. I think I shared this once, and I just think it's really worth mentioning again. There were several cities that received their coronavirus relief fund and realized the complexities of FEMA and literally threw their hands up and said, we're going to forego FEMA because we have these funds from the CARES Act, and we're just going to use these CARES Act funds. We're estimating over $40 million worth of FEMA reimbursement. And it is tedious, and it is hard.
For us specifically?
For Metro.
40 million.
Yes, that we've already identified. Now, it hasn't all been transferred, but it's been identified. Some of it has been transferred out of these dollars already. Probably close to 20 million of the 40 have already been transferred out of here. Just waiting for those other claims to actually be filed and get that first reaction from FEMA. But I think that's worth pointing out that it is extremely labor intensive. Our departments have to provide an extreme amount of detail, invoices, payroll records. We have our FEMA consultants from the consulting firm is Disaster Recovery Services. They're working with us on our tornado, our derecho, and our flood, in addition to COVID. And they are priceless for what they're doing. And so I think it's just a huge, I think it's really important to point out that there's $40 million that we could have just left on the table for simplicity. We could have just kept it real straightforward and said, we're going to use CRF funds. But that turned out to be a lot. I think we had originally estimated like 25 to 30. And for it to be at 40 and probably still, will grow a little bit after that, it's a lot of work, but it does make this reporting very challenging and very complex because it does add constant movement in the numbers.
So those cities that didn't go ahead and apply for the FEMA funds, are they still able to Will FEMA look at any new applications and decide to give them money?
I would suspect they could.
Okay.
Yeah, there's even changes going on at FEMA. They recently have extended the date of incident. So if you think about a more typical disaster that FEMA's ever been involved in, you have a tornado that came through on March 2nd. That was our date. All the damage that happened on March 2nd was all included. This disaster started in March and hasn't ended. And that's new to FEMA. They've just really never had this, the project period extend for so long. It was supposed to end September 30th of 2021. They have just extended it to 12/31/2021. So it gives us more opportunity to continue to identify things that are eligible for FEMA. We're going to try to get our money there first before we use the other local funds. So whether it was the CRF in the past or whether it's the ARP funds that we're now talking about. But because of the changing rules from FEMA, I believe somebody could probably still go back.
And so our potential 40 million could be lower.
Could also be higher.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we've gotten almost 20 million that has been verified by FEMA to date. So we have another 20 million that is either been submitted or is in the process of being submitted. And that only gets us through, in some cases, June 30.
Okay.
So that's why I was saying as we get into the end of September, and if we take it all the way to December,
Yeah.
it's much more likely that number's going to grow.
Okay.
But it also just means why these numbers are going to change. And so bear with us. It's the complexity of the U.S. Treasury reporting was tenfold because of knowing that we were going to submit to FEMA. We didn't want to leave any CRF dollars on the table. And yeah.
So the question is, what are we doing with the CRF dollars once the claims are approved by FEMA and that money goes back into our CRF account? What are we doing with the money?
So if the December 15th of 2020, that resolution said any dollars
So anything returned.
that become available, either because one of our nonprofits didn't spend the whole contract or our estimates were off and we had more left, will be spent on public safety salaries.
Okay.
That is the most advantageous way of spending those funds. They were eligible. Every dollar we spend on public safety salary goes into a COVID reserve.
Yeah.
That COVID reserve was originally $29.8 million, which all got appropriated. If that amount goes up, it's not appropriated for spending yet. It would have to go back before council.
Okay.
But at that point, so it kind of once the numbers stop moving, we'll have a better
Right.
idea of what's available. For our council members, you may recall, we just did $850,000 out of that for some of our homeless provisions that we needed with the encampments, and a few of the other areas got added as an amendment. So that was an example of where we did do additional spending out of that.
Okay. Okay.
So,
We'll go to council, so we'll know once we get to that point.
yep. So the way that the Treasury report is organized is contracts over 50,000, and then grants over 50,000, which for us are just contracts with nonprofits. Then you have the next line is the contracts under 50,000 in total, grants under 50,000 in total, and then that last line is aggregate payments to individuals. That really represents the hazard pay, public safety salaries that we're spending, and then we had payroll related to admin and sick and leave during all of that initial shutdown. And then we have salaries after that, predominantly police overtime for mask enforcement. And not just police, we actually had public works and a few of our other departments.
Codes.
Yep, related to different enforcement. So all of those salaries, all of those metro salaries and benefits are part of that aggregate payment to
Can you
individual.
repeat that? So hazard pay.
Hazard pay,
Okay.
The public safety salary, which is going to reach that 29.8 million. It hasn't yet because we're waiting to clear out some of the FEMA costs, just as we get kind of, and it's not that it gets obligated just yet, but as it gets, kind of makes its way through the FEMA process.
Okay.
And then admin, sick, leave, I kind of bundle all of that together. Those were a lot of the expenses that were incurred during shutdown.
The sick leave, who does that apply to?
All of the departments.
All departments.
Yeah, so admin, sick, and leave. Think about when the libraries were closed for, several weeks to months. We had various departments that were closed. If those employees couldn't work from home, there was accommodations made if they had a family member come down with COVID, if they got COVID, different. So admin, sick, and leave kind of all got bundled together. But the other piece became also our mask enforcement. We incurred a lot of overtime, predominantly by police, but also public works. There were some codes, water and sewer had some overtime because of different enforcement. So smaller amounts by other departments.
Is that broken down? I'm just curious as to how much it costs to do mask enforcement.
The total overtime that I've kind of labeled it all as mask enforcement is close to $5 million.
Okay.
And that's in that other hard copy sheet that I handed you. So you can see admin, sick, and leave kind of combined.
Okay.
You can see the overtime, you can see hazard pay, and then the employee benefits related to all those items above.
Okay. Thank you.
So that's a recap back to CRF. And I'm happy to bring these as they change. They'll change because what you'll see like on the U.S. Treasury report are that the contract amounts will come down and the payments to individuals will go up. So I'm happy to bring that if you want me to. Some of the line items will change, like some of our expenses in sheltering that you see by the expense description. Some of those will be eligible for FEMA, so those numbers will come down. And that's why that 107 doesn't equal our 121. And even the report, I'm purposely not entering enough compensation to hit our exact dollar amount, because I don't know if that would then say, okay, now you've hit the 121, 122, 775, and then we'd be done.
What was the Southeast Community Capital Corporation for? Because there's several line items here. There's one for 3.2 million, one's for 1.4, 263,000, 1 million. There's several different
That's
awards.
Pathway.
It's what?
That's Pathway Lending. That's their their actual name.
Well, they should say that.
Yes.
Okay, I'm like, there's a lot of
Yeah,
stuff.
that's Pathway Lending.
Gotcha.
Okay. Any questions on that reporting or any other requests?
I'd just like to say thank you for bringing this to us. This is very helpful to kind of understand where the dollars went aggregately, and as we're looking at getting more FEMA claims and getting more of the CARES funding back in the CARES and looking at what we want to do with it, this would be helpful. So I don't know that we need something like this every week, but once we get to the point where there have been significant additions or changes, it'd be nice to
Well,
see that.
that's a good point. This is a quarterly report.
Okay.
So our next report really will be due October 10th or 11th, depending what day of the week it is. So I'll bring this updated each quarter. That's really when we make the significant shifts and movements. And I'll give you updates on the FEMA claims.
Just last question, sorry.
Yeah.
With some of this, like I recognize, Second Harvest for, and that obviously came to council. We said we're appropriating X number of dollars to Second Harvest or to, whatever. But a lot of this we obviously council didn't necessarily appropriate specifically this. So was that in the resolution where we said X number of dollars went to Metro's response, and then from that you guys just sort of did what you wanted?
On the nonprofits?
On, well, like on any of it, like, so school tech supply was 143,000, KIP Nashville's 173.
That's part of the 24 million for MNPS.
Okay, so that's, yeah, so that's what I mean, so then, so
There's a lot of ways to kind of cross.
to break
slice
out,
and dice. So yeah, so like on the expense description list, you'll see that the final amount that MNPS charged was $23,987,275.
and so T-Mobile for 4 million, I'm assuming was the hotspots.
Correct.
And then Access Security for 1.4. So these are just very specific things that that's what I'm saying. So a lot of it was within the Metro's response that we didn't necessarily say, okay, here's these line items that we're going to appropriate. That's kind of what I would have preferred to have seen, to be honest, but instead of just a lump sum of like, you know.
Am I remembering correctly that MNPS presented what they wanted to spend money on?
Yep.
And then
I'm saying outside of that, though. Outside of the MNPS part of it, because that was like, what, 24 million, 20-something million? Yeah,
So
but there's stuff outside of this.
So for example, on the access, that is actually some of the temporary labor that was at the shelters.
Yeah. This one, I just,
So when we said we need X amount for sheltering, it included
Right.
many different.
several
line
different
items.
contracts for several different things. Yes, I just am, I will get into the weeds. And so I would like to say, well, if you were going to appropriate $1 million, but that incorporates 15 different contracts, I want to know what those 15 different contracts are and what it's for. That's just me, though.
But as long as it's for what we appropriated it for,
Yeah,
and
I
we
see.
got that service,
Right,
then
I
it
just-
doesn't, it washes out.
And we don't
I'd still like
always
to know.
know which contracts we're using before it's appropriated.
Yeah, no, I get
That's
it.
a challenge.
I get it. I'm just, that's my needing to see it. But
Richard, just one question. There are a couple of entries here for banks, Truist and Morgan Stanley. This will probably come up again, I would imagine. What is the,
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, if you look at the summary by description, when it says TANs, interest and fees. So one of the eligible uses for CRF was our tax anticipation notes. So one of the things that Metro does on a pretty regular basis, because we don't get all of our property tax income, our largest source of revenue, we don't get that all at once. So throughout the year, until those are all received, we will borrow either from other funds or externally. And because of COVID and the drop in activity tax revenues, we actually borrowed externally from banks. So when we paid back that interest, that was considered TANs, and that was
what these are?
that's the Truist, Morgan Stanley. There's a couple of bond counsel fees, and about 142 of other interest.
And then one other question that, there's like a charge in here for DVL Siegenthaler. Is that an example, would we have like just a normal contract with them and then allocate a piece of that to COVID response, or was there a separate contract for COVID response?
Well, amendments were made to add COVID-related activities to contracts. So even if we had a contract, we had to make sure that what we were asking somebody to do was what was within that contract. So if the service was slightly different, then we had to do an amendment. I would have to see if with DVL, PR was probably general enough that they helped with all of it. Remember we were doing daily news briefings? It seems like a long time ago, but they were our partners in preparing signs, helped us with our website. Is there anything I'm missing? I mean, a lot of the communications all came through DVL. So through FEMA, which we used a lot of the FEMA rules to apply to CRF because FEMA rules were more restrictive than really any of the guidance was black and white about. So FEMA rules allow us to use existing contracts. So we didn't have to do a new contract just for FEMA, but it had to be the same service. So if it was a different service, we still had to do an amendment to that contract. Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Then the next thing that on the agenda that we want to talk about is related to our rent and mortgage assistance. I did circulate a draft, but that is for you all to really just start with. If there are, changes and questions. But as we talked about, and I'm so glad that you can join us, thank you, to talk about our HOPE program with ERAP and really talk about how that's going. I mean, I think there's been a lot of questions about how it's going. We don't have to go too far into those details. But what you identified, Dr. Kroom, was that missing link. Right. And that was that we had folks that were falling through because of the average median income cap that's on the emergency rental program. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Kroom. I don't know if everybody has met Dr. Kroom, head of Metro Action Commission.
Hi, well, as of Monday, of the initial $20.8 million that we have, we've spent $17.5 million. So we expect that those funds will be expended. We still believe no later than the second week of September that will be completely expended. We did get some good news yesterday. Our agency, along with Memphis, Knox County, and Rutherford, approached the state because they did get a portion of Davidson County's money. We asked them for that money. They sent us a contract yesterday for $24 million. That would give then $22 million of that would be for rental assistance for our county. That still has to come before council because we just got the contract on yesterday. So that will help us with the money that we know we're getting ready to run out of, but we have applications that we still need to process that will immediately go toward these dollars that THDA is providing. Council just also appropriated for us about $9 million, I think at you all's meeting on last week or week before, I apologize for not remembering which, that is also ERA funding. And that's the funds that we are expending to nonprofits who have applied for those funds. So that RFP has closed. We're actually reviewing the applications now from the nonprofits that applied for those dollars. So we have that piece. That's, as I said, $9 million that's already been appropriated. And then we will ask THDA for the additional $16 million that matches that $9 million that we believe should have been given to our county, so that they can provide that as well. But they're not allowing us to have those dollars until they get through this first process, which is the first set of money that they just gave us, which is the $24 million that we just got for yesterday. One of the things that we've noticed in administering the dollars is there is a group of people who don't qualify because, just because you're $5 over the median doesn't mean suddenly you have all this money to pay your rent. And so that was of concern to us because we are unable to assist them with the dollars that we have. We're very fortunate in that I know you and I had quite a bit of conversation about just the population that historically does not qualify for federal money because they're undocumented. That is not a problem with these dollars. They're not required to have a Social Security card or any of those types of things. But we do think that part of the gap is, in fact, those individuals who really do need help, who were impacted by the pandemic, but who, as I said, are above the 80% median income. We can't serve them in any of our programs, not even the ones that we administer on a regular basis through the Metropolitan Action Commission. So we thought that was an area that you all might want to consider. As you all know, the ERA funds don't do anything with mortgage. That's not what they're for. I can also say, though, that our demand for mortgage has not been high. We know that there are some other things out there that people might be relying on. But we haven't seen a high demand for mortgage assistance. Of the 6,000 applications we have, we've denied 2 because of mortgage. So we're just not seeing that demand coming into us. And we didn't see it when we were administering the CARES Act funding that we got through MDHA either. Doesn't mean it's not out there, it's just not the demand or the request is not coming from to us.
Could it be because they know that it's just for rental relief, and so they're just not even wasting their time with it, and that if we did have that mortgage relief, that we would sort of be flooded with it?
I would say yes if we hadn't also administered the CARES Act funding through MDHA, which was mortgage assistance. And if you talk to whether it's us or even many of the nonprofits, the level of requests that or demand that we thought we would see, we have not seen.
I guess that's good.
Again, we're not sure why that is. We were actually quite surprised, but it's just not been as heavy as one would think.
So it's mainly utilities and rental assistance?
It's mainly utilities and rental assistance, but as you know, Metro Action Commission has a pretty large amount of utility assistance dollars anyway. And then just so you'll know, there's also about to be a pretty large appropriation of money just for water assistance that's coming through the Tennessee Housing Development Agency. It's still going to be individuals qualifying that normally would qualify through Metro Action Commission. But when we contacted the water department and just said, hey, how many people do you have in arrears, just so we could kind of anticipate what it might be, the numbers that they sent us were not as large as we thought that they would be. So we know that there's dollars coming for water as well, and we're able to also provide assistance for water through the ERA funds that we have. So I think for us, as we were kind of thinking through what we believe is a gap or might be helpful, that was certainly one of the areas. And then the other is obviously just the struggle that people are having on the court side with people to advocate for them. We have been doing probably as much work trying to keep people from being put out even after we've paid, because unfortunately what's happening is landlords, even after they get the money, they are then still giving tenants letters as if they are not eligible to remain in their apartment. So we're spending quite a bit of time. Fortunately, the tenants are calling us, reminding the landlords of the agreements that they signed and that they actually cannot put them out of housing. So that's another area that we know needs to be looked at, which is really around how are we able to assist tenants, not just the ones who are in the courts, but also the ones who've gone through the courts, who've been helped, but the landlords are still trying to do things to frighten them to think that they have to move out.
Question. Thank you for being here today. When you say that the median, the 80% median cap is keeping out a group, is missing a gap, how many people do you suspect are in that group? And if we were to designate funds toward that group, what should we say should be the median cap?
We're recommending between 80 and 100% of median is what we think is a reasonable place to start. It's difficult to know the demand because I think, kind of to your point, because we don't serve that particular group, they haven't reached out to us. But we know that just from conversations with some of the other nonprofits that is a group that does need help. And in many cases, they don't have anywhere to turn. What that dollar amount should be, I apologize. I'm just not, I don't feel like I could give you a good number. I can say that we think that it's reasonable to say 80 to 100% of median, and that there are some dollars there that allows you to assist those individuals who might have lost their jobs, and who might actually be back into work now, but to pay back rent, that's pretty difficult to do, to play catch up.
Thank you.
Are there any criteria other than the test of income against the median that have been applied or should be applied?
Treasury, in the first set of money that we got, it was very specific. It has to be COVID related. You have to have, not that you had to have COVID, but it had to be tied to COVID. The second set of money, fortunately, just says that whatever happened had to have occurred during the pandemic. And as long as it occurred during the pandemic, then the restrictions that were on us for the first part of money, they're less under the second part of money because most people have been impacted by the pandemic, but they can't say that it was COVID, directly COVID related. So I think that That language, which is closer to the second pot of money that Treasury has provided, is something that you all might want to consider, that this occurred during the pandemic, because we do have situations where people have owed money prior to the pandemic. That's difficult to keep reaching back. And so as long as it's within that time frame, then it makes it easier. And so what the federal government has said is that anything after March of 2020, which is, I think, when the official sort of, yes, we're in a pandemic piece, is what we are, what we're looking at. Around that same date time might be reasonable for you all to consider. But I'll just say that would be my recommendation, that you really do think about it from the standpoint of the pandemic, because unfortunately there are some people who weren't paying their bills or doing things prior to that, and I don't know if that's your target group. I'm not sure.
So I know we've talked about this, but I think for some perspective for the people that aren't council members on the committee, we get called quite a bit with people being, evicted from their homes quite often. And so for those that weren't caught in the beginning, your organization, you have people at the courts looking out and having them fill out applications. Can you speak to that a little bit?
And so then you all, I hope, will be as proud as we've been. Nashville has gotten quite a bit of national press about the work with the Housing Court with Judge Bell and the work that's being done with the HOPE program and with other CARES Act funding as well. But when Treasury allowed us to take some of the funding that we have, and we hired 2 housing navigators, they are in the courts the whole day, really. And they're there, first of all, if there are people who need help, who are at risk of being evicted, they can help them get an application into our system. But they're also there, particularly in the housing court, so that when people have to show up in court to report on the status of their HOPE application with our organization, so they can tell the judge at that moment, this individual is either paid out or is about to be paid out. And so what it's done is it's allowed us to keep people from being evicted. The other thing it's done is it's, even if there's been a judgment against them, it gives us a tool to be able to negotiate with the landlord and say, hey, this person is about to be paid out. And some of those payments, I mean, they could be $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 for one individual. And so when you look at that, the amount of money that a landlord could recover as a result of just having their applicants participate in this process has led them in some cases to just say, then I won't evict, we'll wait until the application is actually processed. Again, in other cases, they've gotten judgments, but our team has been able to work with them and convince them not to actually put the person out. I will just say for the record so that you'll know, we paid the back rent to a certain point. We can go up to 12 months by Treasury guidance, but we also pay 3 months forward. But landlords who are receiving that money have to sign an agreement that for 90 days, past the point at which we paid last, they cannot evict this tenant for non-payment. So if our last payment to you carries that tenant through November, even if they don't pay you in October, which we're hoping they will, you still can't evict them for 90 days past the point that you accepted the last payment for us. The goal is that it should buy the tenant some time. It should help them if they have an employment situation to be able to get a job.
So you have 2 housing navigators. Do you need more?
We do have 2 housing navigators. We are bringing on, well, let me say this. We have 2 housing navigators and we have a court team. So the courts team are the people who are specifically processing the court's applications. We will use some of the federal funding that we have. We're in the process of hiring 10 more individuals now, actually 20 more, because of all the additional money, so that we can get applications processed quicker. And I thought I'd never hear myself say this in my life, but no, we don't need this money to hire more people. The Treasury dollars give us a 10% admin rate, and we are able to use that to make sure that we have the staffing that we need. I should have told you to close your ears. We do not need dollars from this body for that purpose because the Treasury dollars do cover our ability to do that.
So when you're talking about we need people for after they go through the court and after there's been a verdict, what do you mean specifically?
Well, what we're doing really in that situation is it's our team, but it's the same team that's processing applications or that's doing other things that the customers are calling back and saying, hey, the landlord just sent me this saying I have to move out. So the courts team that we have and that we're expanding, those are some of the folks who will be specifically handling those types of situations. Because again, we get them through the process, we get them paid, but then we have a few landlords who are, let's say, doing some things that they really should not be doing once they receive the money.
So more legal services?
More legal services, yes.
Okay,
I would say.
thank you. Hey, sorry, I just bring that up because we've had big eviction situations that have popped up, and it's a scramble to find lawyers who are able to take on the case, especially when a lot of these people can't afford that. So I just want y'all to keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's where I was saying. So you've got, how many people are on your court, what you call your court team?
So we have 2 individuals that's actually physically in the courts, and then we have about 5 or 6 that are specifically, they just process applications that are in the courts.
So that puts like your current team working on this about 10. You're about to hire 20 folks.
20 people, because if you look at our portal, we have 6,000 applications in total that we've received. We know that we're about to run out of the first pot of money. But in order for us to process quickly, those that's now in there, that second part of money, we have to be ready. And so that's why we're hiring the additional people, because we need to move those applications pretty quickly as well. So that's the reason for the additional hires.
Did you feel like 90 days from now, with the additional human capacity, you will have flushed out the backlog? Is it 90 days? Is it 120 days?
I would say probably closer to 120. And part of that is because we also have, what I didn't mention is we also have MDHA. That's also a separate group. So what we did with MDHA is they have their own licenses that we purchase through Treasury. And so we take the MDHA applications and they're set aside. MDHA is actually allowed to approve all of their own people as being eligible. Then our team goes in, checks them, and pays. And so there's a different set of people. That's why I say the extended time, because some of the new people that we're bringing on will also be working with the MDHA team to make sure that we are paying them out because they have a number of applicants that are also in our system. But they have a specific set aside that's to ensure that we're taking care of them.
And last question, all this pot of monies that you alluded to earlier from the different sources, that's what you're counting on this group of folks that you have now and the ones you're hiring to distribute?
That's correct.
Is that, I mean, do you have estimates? Is that enough?
People or money? At this point, based on at least what we're seeing, so I'll give you this as an example. We've processed 2,000 applications and spent about $17.5 million. So we believe that we will hit this target right at it. That doesn't include those who are not eligible. MDHA, we have a rough idea that that's about $2 million. So just from looking at their applicants and understand that their applicants don't owe the full amount. because some of it is already being paid by the federal government, so we're only just paying the applicant's share. But when we look at what we know is in the portal, we're looking at about $2 million when it comes to them. When we look at the applications that we have remaining that we believe actually qualify, or that will be a complete application, we feel like we will have enough money.
So one fast question. First, thanks for doing what you're doing. It really is amazing. Earlier, when we were talking about salary thresholds, if you're $5 over the 80%, you're just not eligible, correct?
It's not eligible.
So
And I
reason-
have no other funding source in our agency to pay anything because the 80% is high compared to normally what our funding would cover. It's substantially higher than what our funding would normally cover.
So if we extend that to 100%, if you're $5 over the 100%, you're just not eligible.
You're not eligible. But you do know that at some point you do have to have a cutoff point.
Right. Is there any way to do a decrescendo, though, where, between 80 and 100, you're eligible for X percent, between 100 and 125%, Y percent, or is it just not necessary to go above the 100%?
I would suggest that you look at the up to 100%. Anything beyond that, I think it's not that people don't need help, but I don't know
Just a
if that's
different level.
where you want to be.
Okay.
That's the best way I can describe it.
Thanks.
I got two questions. One, it sounds like you feel like there's going to be sufficient funds available, but let's say we allocate a certain amount. If someone has 8 months of rent in arrears and somebody else has 1 month, is it just first come, first serve, and some people get a larger amount, some get a smaller amount? Is it allocated proportionally? How does
It's
it get
demand.
applied?
So, for example, under the funds that we have, you have to prioritize individuals who are below 50% of poverty. So they're a priority, but based on what we're seeing, that's who's coming in. That's who's asking for help. And it's literally based on your needs. So if you come in and you are 9 months in arrears, we're going to pay you 9 months in arrears. If you are a month in arrears, we're going to pay a month. However, what the Treasury guidance says is that you can assist somebody up to 18 total months. And so let's say you came in February and you were 3 months in arrears. If you come in December and you need help again, I'm counting that we already helped you, but it was only 3 months. And so you actually are eligible again because we only helped you up to the 3 months when you were eligible for up to 18 total months in terms of the Treasury funding.
So per person caps are not really applied in
It
this
does
situation?
not. I mean, it's incredible to see. I've never seen this in the years I've done this, the level of payout that you're allowed to do to bring somebody whole. Because the ultimate goal is when that person walks away, they owe nothing. That's the approach Nashville has taken. There are some cities that have not. They have simply said, we're going to pay 3 months, and that's all we're going to do. The problem with that is when you're dealing with people who are having income issues, paying 3 months and I owe 8, that doesn't really, yes, I paid 3, but if you don't have it for 8, you don't have it for 5.
Yeah.
And so our approach is we're using what Treasury allows us to do, which is try and bring them clean so that even if the landlord later on says, I want possession of my property, what the person isn't left with is this huge bill that they owe to this landlord so that they're unable to try and find housing.
And the second question, which is a little unrelated, is the legal challenges that you're facing with people that are subject to eviction. Has there been outreach to the law schools that might have clinic programs that would be supervised to assist?
We have not done that specific outreach. I know that Judge Bell and her team have done different kinds of outreach. We have not. I think that, I know that we're working with, I want to say it's Vanderbilt, that's one of the groups that we're working with through the housing court, and I believe she's working with a couple of others, but I don't want to state that emphatically because I don't know for sure.
There's been other groups who have been helping, like Workers' Dignity. They do worker advocacy, but they've had to take on a heavy load of evictions. And so one of the problems we're running into is there's obviously legal aid that does free legal services, but legal aid cannot assist someone who doesn't have legal status. So there's also people falling through the cracks that way.
Thank you for mentioning that, because that's an area that we know is a huge gap as well.
So while we have Dr. Kroom, I thought we would want to go through this proposed resolution. It looks very similar to the resolution when we first engaged United Way and their financial network partners to distribute rent and mortgage utility assistance. It is updated, obviously, for rescue plan. The idea is to mirror the HOPE program, that all of the terms of the HOPE program would apply, that we are simply raising the income threshold so that folks that are over 80% can qualify for this. I don't think we have a cap in here.
Yeah, we do not. We need to
So,
add that.
Based on our conversation today, I think, Alex, are you ready to take over drafting for me? I'm glad Alex is here. I'm looking probably somewhere in our 1, 2, 3, 4.
Section
That's what I
3.
saw for.
Oh, section 3?
Well, it says,
And in the whereas in the recitals.
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's probably section 3, because it says who are unable to make these payments as a result of negative income, and that these.
We said and not otherwise eligible, but we want to, that's where I think we
Yeah,
need to clarify.
yeah.
Joe, I think the other thing is the rent payments being, March of 2020 forward, to try to, since the idea is to provide the assistance for time during the pandemic. Is that?
Yeah.
That's within the HOPE program now, right? That's their
Yeah,
requirement.
I don't know exactly what's in there, but it's not mentioned in here.
And I wonder if, Alex, correct me if we could handle it by referring to the parameters of the HOPE program, so that really then gives the nonprofits that are distributing these funds a complete set of guidelines, not just what's in here, because there's so much more to the guidelines than we're going to be able to put in this specific, but that if we say they are basically dispersed in accordance with the HOPE program requirements, with the exception of allowing the income threshold to meet 100% of the AMI by household. So that average median income is different based on individuals in the household, and that's very specific to the HOPE program.
And so this is going to go through the United Way or just directly to MAC?
To United Way.
Oh, it does go to United Way. And then from United Way to MAC?
No,
What?
it would be from United Way to the partners that they engage against. So like last time I think United Way had, I want to say like 36 or
36. It was
38,
36,
something, yeah. We can't both be wrong.
I know.
Partners, I don't know that they'd have that many this time, but that it would essentially be a mirror of the program.
Is this not something y'all want to do?
We think
You can say no.
We think it's a good opportunity for the partners to be involved.
Okay.
I think this has been very frustrating for them not being more directly involved. We think this is a good opportunity for them.
And I'll say this so that Dr. Kroom doesn't have to. With the RFP for some of these nonprofits, what this will actually allow, if certain nonprofits are selected through the RFP that MAC has put out for the second round, the ERAP2 funds, once those announcements are made, United Way can come on the back end and subgrant to those same organizations. And what happens is when somebody walks in that door, if they qualify for the HOPE program, they are right in that portal. If they are over the dollar amount, they say, oh, we have this set of funds. And it creates folks not getting shifted around.
All right, yeah.
Perfect.
So this location is specifically for people between 80 and 100.
Yes, so these are, the great news is that everything Dr. Kroon was talking about is not part of the recovery funds that we're talking about. The 260 million, 259 million, those are all separate in addition to. But this request would be from the 259 million. And the math isn't perfect. I had asked kind of what is the average number of months that folks are receiving. I mean, you heard it that it can be up to 18, but it's averaging about 5 to 6. So we looked at a 1,500 month average times 6 months times 300 families. And that was like 2.7 million. I could do the exact math. And so we rounded up to 3 million as our starting point of saying, we think that's the right amount. The funds would go through June 30th, 2022. And so obviously if we saw them depleted quickly, we'd know there was more need out there. But it would allow for that initial allotment.
Is the 300 family, that's just the way the math worked out, or is?
No, we chose 300 simply because we knew we had some applications that were denied for income, but we couldn't go on that low number because if families knew they were over the threshold, they weren't applying.
Well, it strikes me, just from hearing your backlog, it strikes me that once it's known that the 300 families.
Well, remember, this is not, if you apply for HOPE, if you are eligible for HOPE, you have to go through the HOPE program. This is going to be only families that are over 80% of the AMI. If you are under, you actually don't qualify for these dollars.
Right.
Can I give an example?
Yeah.
So of all the applications that we've done, we've denied 4 for income, being over income. And so when they ask, well, how many have you denied? That's a really small number. And so they certainly couldn't base it on our number of denials. And so I think that was a part of, as you were talking about, the formula that you looked at, because we just really haven't denied that many people based on income.
And that may be because they aren't applying.
That's very well true.
And Mayor Jo, correct me if I'm wrong, but the 300 individual numbers, was that close to how many were served with the 3 million that we gave in the CARES Act? With the CARES Act funding that we gave for rent and mortgage relief?
No, we served more than that
Okay.
because we didn't, I think they were doing 2 and 3 months.
Okay.
So 6 months is a lot, and we don't know that we'll see 6 months, especially as your income, as we're raising the income level, we may not see,
Same backlog.
yeah, as long of a backlog. Are there other, we identified we wanted to add the cap, and we wanted to be very specific that it needed to be for the HOPE, modeled after the HOPE program. Were there any other questions on any of the items that were in the resolution?
Question, yes, about the June 30, 2022, I think you mentioned, was there a specific reason why we were cutting?
I just did it with
that
our
date?
fiscal year.
Fiscal year, and just for
I think
1
it was
year.
far enough down the road that we would monitor either these funds are going to be gone really fast and we're going to want to do an amendment
Okay.
with either more funds, or they just kind of trickle along, and then as we get closer to that date, if we need to do a contract amendment to extend the date but not add more funds, we can do that. I kept it with the fiscal year.
Okay.
I'm guessing this is just something we would monitor as we go, because we're having to make a lot of assumptions. But, I mean, even though the income's going to be higher, presumably some of the rents will be higher. And the question is, do we want to cap a certain number of months of rent to try to serve more people, or do we want to keep the same, criteria of whatever it is we'll take care of? But we could serve a lot fewer people if people have fairly large.
We did talk
rent
about the 6
incomes.
months, so we could actually put that in there, that this is for up to 6 months.
Dr. Kroon, if you wouldn't mind weighing in on that, do you think having a month cap or having it in line with the HOPE where it's just during the pandemic would be more
I think given the number that you're talking about, the 6 months is reasonable, because the other thing that we've seen in some cases, people go ahead and try and pay something. And if their incomes are higher, there's, I believe, a stronger likelihood that they have paid something, versus some of what we're seeing, which is in some cases people who've paid absolutely nothing during this time. So I think the 6 months is probably reasonable.
Thank you.
All right. Alex, is the best thing to do to make those edits, and then we'll send it out tomorrow for everyone, and if there's no changes?
Well, your filing deadline is
Friday.
So, and I don't think you want to meet again between now and then. So they can either vote to allow us to make the edits and file on behalf, or we can try to draft something right now. So I have a working draft of the last part, but I don't know if you all had voted on the 6-month part or not. So or if you all had any ideas about whether you wanted to have the 6-month cap, but.
Before we start voting, I think this is a fantastic idea. I'm also a board member of the United Way, so since they're getting a 10% administration fee.
That's happened since we were meeting last time.
Since the last time we
Thank you for serving, yes.
My only concern with the 6 months is, right, they might have paid something, but I'm wondering what suffered because they were trying to get a little bit more into that. So maybe, something like their children or whatnot. I mean, people have kids, and I'd rather be more uniform. So if Hope is not putting a cap on a number of months, and if it's only been a couple of people so far, I mean, we could put the 6 months and monitor it and see what comes out of that, or we could just keep it uniform like the rest of Hope and not have the partners have an extra criteria for this specifically.
I'm more inclined to go on that route. If we're going to keep it in line with the requirements for Hope, add the 80 to 100% to fill that gap. I'm not really sure that we need to put a month cap on it unless we come back and see that there's a lot more months than we think. But I agree that starting out, if we don't see an immediate need to put a month cap on it, especially when there's not one on the Hope, then I would.
What's the cap on Hope?
12 months. 12 months in arrears, so you can go 12 months back.
So any more than that, yeah.
You can assist forward, but the total cannot be more than 18 months.
So if our calculation was 6 months at X dollars, 300 families, is it contemplated that 6 months could potentially be 9 months, 3 months forward? Or are we contemplating the 6 months being 3 months in arrears and 3 months forward to get to that 300 families? Or is it more only 4 were rejected?
It would have been either, it could have been, 2 months, forward, 4 months arrears. It could have been any combination. You could also look at it as, would it be 9,000, right? You could almost look at it as a dollar amount that if somebody's rent was lower or mortgage.
We're also sitting on quite a bit of money. So, I mean, if more is needed, then it's needed.
Remember, they have to give us monthly reports. And, I mean, Junod can speak to United Way. They're going to give us as much detail and feedback, whether we want it or not. And I mean that is a good way.
So if we uncapped it, as you're suggesting, we can still go back and fund again, which is easier than changing the parameters and trying to get the same family that was rejected twice to come a third time, because they won't, right? They'll be lost. So I agree.
Okay, so I have to remember back to making motions. Does somebody want to make a motion for, you all have the draft, the changes that would be made to it would be to specifically add that the individuals that qualify for this are over the 80% AMI, but under 100, but do you say at 100?
Equal to or less than.
100% AMI.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, it has to be over 80 because Hope stops at 80.
Yeah, so
Over 80%.
over 80,
to 100.
but up to 100% AMI. All other terms of the HOPE program exist for this eligibility.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any noes? Okay, we have one
not voting.
One abstention. All right, thank you all, and I do have to thank you again for being here, and also, Dr. Krum did allude to it, but, I mean, I received the email from the U.S. Treasury saying, we got to know what Nashville's doing. You have had such a significant increase in your disbursement of funds. You are doing this better than others. We have 85% of our allotment distributed. There are cities that are in 10, 20, and 30%. So, really,
Congratulations.
program nationwide, and Nashville got it going. So, thank you for.
I'll share that with my very exhausted team.
Rightly, deservedly exhausted. And really just some kudos too, I have to say, a call was put out to Metro departments to say, can anybody help? And departments did send folks to help with MAC. So it really is a team effort in many, many ways.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
Just also even just saying that the mayor's office sent their interns and they didn't want to go back to the mayor's office.
Yeah, I think there's a roundtable discussion. It's either tomorrow or what day is today? Tomorrow, with the U.S. Treasury. That when they reached out and said we really do need to know your best practices. So.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank
Learned a lot today.
Thank you all.
Good luck hiring 20 people.
Oh, yeah, 10 so far.
Oh, good,
10 so far.
good.
And then our next item on the agenda is labeled guiding principles. And Kristen Wilson is here. What we really want to do is kind of start to create a bigger picture. You know, we could have these resolutions that come out one at a time, and we'll hear from folks, but we really probably need to look at this at a bigger, broader level, and really look at a framework. So when we've been putting a framework together, we haven't just been sitting around waiting. Kristen's been really diligent with all of our departments, all of our different community programs, getting all the calls from what people are asking for and needs. And so really, as we think about how we would like this committee to make recommendations, it's on a set of guiding principles. So Kristen's going to walk us through that, and then a little bit of what the next step might look like for our September meeting.
Yeah, it's almost hard to wrap your mind around the dollars that are available and how we will distribute them. We did this exercise with the CARES Committee, if you recall, but I think it was something that so many dollars were already kind of moving quickly by the time you all convened that it really didn't allow us to be, I think, quite as thoughtful to step back in the beginning and say, here's where we see at least some of the categories of needs. So there are no dollars represented in anything I'm giving you today. It's more right now, think qualitatively, how would we ask you from the mayor to think about these funds and how they get expended, and some examples of the types of needs we see. But then I'll come back around and talk to you about whether or not you'd like us to make that a little more quantitative of a proposal, like we do for city council when we do a budget process, right? We can absolutely do that, but none of it is, hopefully none of it's locked in stone, and hopefully will just be a helpful guide for you all. Share. And Mary Jo has.
I'll get one from this end. I have it online, but
Do you guys have enough copies, or?
yeah, we got plenty. Does anybody not have one? Okay.
Okay, good. So we have three, really, for what we saw, sort of specific opportunities as we were thinking about our guiding principles. And I'm just going to, be mindful of time, we'll try to move through these, hopefully not too quickly, but at a pace. Just ask questions if you need to. As we did with our CARES funding, number one is going to be around using these funds to protect our community from the pandemic. There are mitigating strategies that we have looked to Metro to put into place throughout, and that really are around what we've been calling direct emergency pandemic response. Now, unlike CARES funding, there actually are more funding streams through the American Rescue Plan that are around some of these activities.
And so there's going to continue to be support and leverage opportunities across different funding sources. I'll give you an example. Vaccination in our testing centers. We have some funding streams through the CDC and through the state that we can use for testing. We have some funding streams through the CDC and state that we can use for supporting our vaccination costs. But there is also restrictions on some of those funds. So our tents that we have at our sites, the traffic management that we do, the security we provide at our sites, those are expenses that we don't have a funding source for, that we would look to these types of funds to support. Similarly, for our homeless and vulnerable population, as we've been working with them, there's both a longer-term piece of work, which HUD has given a lot of funds for, but there are some gaps that come with that. And then there's the emergency shelters. We continue to stand up every time we have an outbreak in the homeless population because we've got to decompress the shelters and put COVID positive homeless individuals someplace that's safe for them to be monitored and also for them to quarantine in and isolate in so that they're not spreading it further in the homeless population and creating a greater community problem for us. And so those, again, have some funding streams that already exist in some of the funding streams that health has. In other cases, things like portable restrooms and showers when we need to bring those into facilities that we stand up or pop up on an emergency basis. We need to find funding support for those. A lot of this is stuff that OEM's engaged in directly, and so you'll, at some point in this process, I suspect, have a great opportunity to interact with our leadership there and hear about some of their experiences. They've done such an amazing job for us all. One thing we didn't spend as much time talking through in the CARES period that I'm really hopeful we can spend some time on here, it serves a dual purpose. One, it's a challenge that we just have already, and I know our council members are pretty familiar with the fact that I've been advocating around this. But in particular, because of COVID, we are seeing greater demand on our fleet and our responses. So our fire department in particular has many more medical emergencies, and we can demonstrate that with increased 911 calls that are around pulmonary and heart-related concerns right now, as well as associated concerns around suicides, overdoses, and those mounting numbers in our communities. What Chief Swan has proposed has been, and he had actually attempted, I think, to bring this forward with the CARES funding, and we just didn't have the capacity for it. I'm going to ask for us to revisit it as a committee at this point in time, is a rapid response fleet that actually can be used to do more of those responses, since the medical calls now really are way outstripping our fire calls. We don't need fire trucks responding, which are expensive, heavy fleet for us, to all those medical calls. And so he's going to bring a proposal for something that I think presents an efficiency for the way we run, and so very responsible use of the taxpayer dollars, at the same time really responds to some of the needs that we're getting through call volumes. OEM has a similar set of questions and requests in public health around, again, some of the vaccination assessment centers and the population shelters. So there's some very direct fleet needs around COVID in our response. And then our 911 center, our ECC, if you recall, last year, there was a lot of work to think through how we make sure that our first responders are aware of somebody's COVID positive status when they're responding, right? Because then they have a different medical protocol that they would go through. That it's pretty inexpensive, but a small amount of technology costs that come through the Motorola solution we put in place to both protect the privacy of those individuals. And so that is held. There's a whole protocol that was put in place, but we just need the technology. So the data is held at the 911 center. It does not, and with public health, does not cross barriers over into police and fire, except for in that specific situation.
That was what I was going to ask.
Yes, this was well worked through and thought through our Board of Health in particular. There was some really important leadership that occurred there. Then further opportunities we had is also for people who are visiting our public facilities, like you are today, and our employees. There is some more infrastructure that we also could use in terms of keeping them safe. Further work on some HVAC, ventilation, filtration upgrades in our metro facilities. And I wouldn't say this only benefits employees. Don't forget, a lot of the folks that are requesting for this are people who are coming to our libraries, people who are coming into our community centers, children who are participating in our after-school care programs who aren't vaccinated. We'd like to make sure that we are thinking through and improving those in metro facilities. And then technology and fleet for also continuing to do more social distancing in our operations. So again, none of this is I'm bringing forward specifically yet. I just want to let you know the categories of conversations that we would like to engage with you. Yes?
So one of the things that we've been hearing is we need more testing facilities, and OEM is currently working on a permanent testing facility, not just the ones that move around. But it was also said that they're having a hard time hiring right now. So is there an appetite to include premium pay in this category?
That's a great question. And one thing we're working to track down right now is with health, the Meharry contract that's in place that supports our testing and assessment centers. Right now is that we're just trying to make sure where that's getting covered from, if that's through a CDC funding stream, or if that's something we would bring into this this allotment with you. And that's where the opportunity would exist for a premium pay for those individuals. What we're really seeing, to be honest, is challenges, not for Meharry to increase staffing. It takes them a couple days to find individuals. But I think what's happening is out there in the community, let's take your Kroger, your Walgreens, or other places where people are going for testing. The volume of demand has spiked suddenly, and a lot of them just already were challenged with hiring, but also just weren't ready to do that. And it's not clear to me always, knowing that it might be temporary, how long they're willing to also to spike their hiring for it too. So there's a little bit more complication to that than not, and Chief Swan will probably be the best person to talk to you about that because he's both been working the phones with a lot of those other entities to understand the demands that we have and whether or not we need to open one site or two sites. I will tell you good news is he was on the ground on a site today that I think we're just waiting for ink to dry on some agreements so we can announce it, and it'll be one that I think people will be very happy with in terms of access. Then we have a third site as an option lined up behind it if we need to open up another site after that, but geographically didn't make as much sense until you get the second site in place.
Okay.
Yeah.
When would they be before us?
The departments?
Yeah, the health department and OEM specifically.
I can come back to that on next steps if you want, because I'm actually going to recommend a couple of these types of emergency pieces in Principle 1 and Principle 2 come soon, as in potentially next meeting.
So I had a follow-up question under employees' safety. So I'm getting a few calls about as this thing spikes again, that people are being asked to go home and quarantine. And would the investment go in this bucket if there was some provision made for sick pay or some other kind of non-scheduled pay while they quarantine at home?
So HR is reviewing right now our sick leave policies. They had passed through the Civil Service Commission a COVID leave last year. That expired in April-May time period. Honestly, it wasn't used that significantly because it was supposed to come after Families First Act, which also doesn't exist now, but also people using their sick leave. And so it was supposed to be an extra buffer to say you'll never be penalized, essentially. You always have enough sick leave. You're not going to get penalized for the COVID time period, essentially. It didn't get that heavily used. And so they're going back through and analyzing the data on that and trying to determine whether or not they need to bring that back and what the priority is against it. Because it's a little bit different now in a world of vaccinations, different protocols around quarantining and isolating, depending if you're vaccinated or not. They're trying to think through, are we creating unintended incentives for employees to not get vaccinated? And so I think they're really trying to give that some thought. But I believe that question has come through the Civil Service Commission again towards them already.
Was it paid sick leave or
It's paid.
It was paid.
It's paid sick leave. Be clear, the program before. All right. Moving on to the second guiding principle here. This is where we get into immediate relief needs. We'll mitigate the impacts of the pandemic via gap filling immediate relief needs against federal and state funds, including and via individual assistance, nonprofits, small business, workforce, and economic recovery. Now, this is, again, one of those where it gets even trickier than it was last time because, again, there are so many other funding source opportunities. So what you all just approved against the ERAP program is a great example of the type of program we would look to do here. And so understanding as well, not just what the federal government is doing with their programs, but as we get more visibility into what the state is doing with their programs. I know we don't have Rep Love here. That was important last time around. It's going to be even more important this time around because the state also has a whole lot more funds than they did last time around too. And so as they set their priorities and distribute funds, I know Mary just talked to you a little bit about that already. This really in my mind is there's a lot of immediate relief funds that are out there. One thing that does seem really important for us to think about sooner than later though is helping people navigate that. So I would think the council members here probably are experiencing and have been experiencing constituent phone calls about how do I get access to X or Y or Z. And there was a thought process that we may want to think about whether or not there's the opportunity to fund some navigation services in the community to help people connect to different types of assistance, whether that's individuals, families, or small businesses.
Question. I don't know if this would fit in this category, but last time around, there was a problem with just information. There people did not necessarily need someone to hold their hand and navigate them, but if they just knew who to call or where to go, and we weren't, because everything was moving so fast, we weren't able to put together the kind of communication, marketing pieces that we needed so that people can be aware of the services. And it would be great if we could plug that in somewhere this time on the front end, especially since we have more time to work with, that we do some kind of communication piece where we're actually, I don't know if it's advertisements on TV, billboards, I don't know what it is, but something other than just having the website and people, even the website wasn't very
User-friendly.
Exactly. So we need something so that people have the information.
Agree. I think that one thing that could be interesting to think about here that Mary Jo and I were talking about is, do we need to be the ones that are doing that and helping the people? Or do we just need to fund somebody? Do we want to put out, something you all could think about as a grant process?
Yes,
that's
we need not our
people
office.
applying to much like an RFP
but
process or a grant process
to do that.
to have someone do that. And the other thing to think about too is that I would love to think about long-term sustainability, right? One of the things that the Metro funds, and Mary Jo probably understands a little bit better, Janad, you might understand better than I do, is the Financial Empowerment Center, for example, at United Way, which is if there's opportunities for us to help people understand that that's where you can go when you need help, regardless of the types of funding out there, the more we can direct people to something like that, that's a sustained resource for people to use than not just while we have American Rescue Plan funds. And so the other thing to think about is a hierarchy of do you have outreach groups and navigator groups that are just helping people understand to go there.
That really resonates with me, the notion of elevating the visibility of those players already out there. You got small business mentioned here a couple of times, and just sort of what the EC did with the navigation program. And I serve on their board, and I just saw what that did for elevating their brand citywide. And so because the way I'm trying to think about this money, because what you said last time is like this money's here today, but it's not. It's right wherever it goes. So we really have to think through it through a lens of investment and leveraging it. And so that notion of permanent increase of the visibility of those that are already some of this work, even if it causes them to flex a little, the Financial Power Center might not do X, Y, Z, but if you help them flexing
but
to
could
that.
they do it for a period of time?
Yeah, certainly.
Knowing that they've been in that environment before, they can be in it now, and they will continue to be in it.
Is this something that we could possibly utilize with Hub? Just because I feel like there would be a 2-for-1 on that, because I think there's a lot of people. The Hub is a wealth of information and a wealth of resource that a lot of people, it's like, the Hub, what, you know? And so if we could have a twofold of like, hey, here's where to go. You need resources, press this button. Are you an individual, a small business, whatever? And it would sort of send you where you need to go, but at the same time, they're able to see like, oh, I can report a codes violation. Oh, I can do this. Oh, I can learn about this. And it's like, it just brings more awareness to something, to your point, of an investment. We have invested in the Hub, and it is a very it's like, they don't have to call us. They can, they can do it themselves. So I would, regardless of how, if we decide to go with an outside partner, I would hope that we would have something on the Hub to direct people to the Hub to say, hey, this is your starting point possibly, so that they can go like, oh, look at all the rest of this stuff,
I'd love to help people navigate, yes.
Kristen, I know the answer to this is probably, we have no idea yet, but one of the things that happened to us in our time frame last fall is we were entertaining, it was nonprofits with requests, small businesses, and right in the middle of kind of our deliberations, you would have a state program announced that might change the sort of calculus of how to approach it. The question is, do we have any sense of what their process is going to be, or what areas they're going to prioritize, or a path to learning that as we go?
Yeah, the main feedback that I've gotten so far, and this has been updated even from my original conversation. I met with somebody from the state, and then I should know what their committee is, but their committee came out recently. Their primary, or at least their initial, I say kind of participation in funds is going to be related to water and sewer infrastructure. And they're going to be offering matching funds for large projects for water and sewer infrastructure projects across the state. I specifically asked if they were going to be doing a nonprofit distribution like they did last time. If you remember, I think there were 3 or 4 primary nonprofits who took care of the whole state and did applications, and that is not going to happen. The state did say, while they are considering some small business and tourism and maybe some economic stimulus in that way, individual individual nonprofits and serving individuals is not, they don't think that's going to be part of their program.
That's helpful.
So that does tell us a little bit about where we might need to fill in the gap.
More to learn from them along the way.
Yeah, I mean, I think things will continue to evolve on their side too.
Because I think it's hard to spend $4 billion quickly, so.
No problem.
Yep, $4 billion. We just got to repeat that.
Okay. And then lastly in this category would be a lot of the things that I think hopefully have been kind of near and dear to some of your hearts in the last round again, to focus on some disproportionate impacts of the pandemic, also equitable small business recovery, small venues and workers in arts and hospitality or something that has been suggested we look at, particularly understanding if there's opportunities to leverage against the venues funding that's come through, the shutter venues funding, family safety, domestic violence. We've already heard from our Office of Family Safety that some of their partners in particular continue to see a spike in numbers, and I would look for resources around that. A conversation we have had as well, I think with some council members, has been equity-oriented diverse events. Council authorized a small allocation over to the NCVC earlier this year to fund expanding the portfolio so that as we economically recovered, we didn't end up with a very narrow set of types of events, but that instead we kind of put ourselves in place to have a multicultural recovery. And I know that was been well received, and if we want to engage in something like that before, you get an opportunity to have Butch Spearden come in and talk to you all about that. And then, again, continuing to think about homeless population, vulnerable and elderly, and libraries, digital inclusion. These are just examples of things that have started to come through that we would work to organize and bring forward to you. And then lastly, we'll invest in evidence-based proven successes to address fundamental equity disparities made more visible by our state's emergencies in the past 18 months. So we've certainly seen, not just in the course of the pandemic itself, but we're grateful for the way the ARP local funds requirements have been framed, that this is also we're supposed to be utilizing these to look at challenges around equity, longstanding challenges around equity. And so in topics like health and behavioral health, community safety, affordable housing, and stormwater and sustainability, I know stormwater is something that is very near and dear to your heart there, council member. We would like to look at, and again, using some of these funds. Now, these are big systemic problems where, you know, a couple $1 million will feel like nothing. In doing this
compared to the need, yeah.
Compared to the need. And so the one thing I'd recommend as we take a look at some of these is, one, these are probably going to be bigger dollar amounts. We may want to start setting some of these up this year with an intent to thinking about our year 2 funds a little bit more in that direction, when hopefully the pandemic response, our highest priority, maybe isn't quite as demanding on us. But also really thinking through the sustainability of those funds. So can we invest in things where there's already existing state or federal funding that we can either be demonstrating so that we get more grants, or aligning to, or feeding into, so that this gives us a chance to surge some resources, but there's continuity on the other side. And I think that's going to be the tricky thing for us to work through, because a lot of these needs are systemic, important needs because they're there in front of us. And so, but I have members of the mayor's office and other parts of our organization that are trying to think through ways that they could do things that are both kind of more immediately impactful as a result of the pandemic in the community, as well as put us perhaps on a more sustained path going forward. My favorite one at the moment, because it changes every day, is I've been challenging the stormwater folks, and one of the things they want to come talk to you about is street trees. Fantastic stormwater mitigation. Makes a very big difference 3 to 4 years out in particular. So, you know, we could really do something transformational in our neighborhoods with those kinds of funds.
Speaking of street trees, one thing I was thinking, is there any thought in terms of discussing the priorities, and I know there are a lot of phenomenal purposes here, but to providing any sort of access to green space in areas of town that don't have access to either greenways or green space, you know, especially in COVID where people are crammed together inside.
That's a great question. We haven't had any specific significant requests come our way. In particular, I think Parks has been wonderfully absorbing a lot of support that came from council this year, both on the green space side as well as the staffing and maintenance side of the parks. And so, but I think that is one we can have them come through and talk about their future plans. And as a district, I think that is most challenged without a park. I think you've got probably the right appreciators at the table.
Say louder. Yeah, not having a library, community center, or park in the district, there's not a lot of places for kids to go. Especially outside.
One of those opportunities that I think we're not doing a very good job, and I'm trying to sort of target those people, are the people that, and you have some in your district as well, where we do have funds to buy these properties that are in flood zones and that are repetitive, what they're calling repetitive losses, and that does become green space. At that point, it is owned by Metro Water, it is maintained by Parks, and it is green space right in the middle of your neighborhood, because typically, you know, those streams go through. So I think really reaching out to those folks that we have the money, and then also we're in the process of creating that FEMA application for more money to fill in the gaps, because it's weird how USAS came up with, we're going to buy that, we can buy that house but not the one next door, even though it's the same situation. They've got weird stuff. So targeting that, because that's an easy way, because you can't create land. There's the land, just take the house that's a repetitive loss and a liability, and then you've got your green space. the other part of it is like, well, so, because I have several lots in a row. It's like pretty large areas of green space, but that's all that it is. So what can we do to make a small little park area? Can we put a, a picnic table, or can we put a swing set, or can we put a something? Now that creates more of a maintenance issue for parks, because then, you can't just take a bush hog and mow through it. You got to sort of be more meticulous about it. So there's that aspect of it. But, can you really make it more of a green space / park versus an empty lot? And so that's something that I would like to look at, just because it's there and we have that opportunity, and it's not, and also we also have that funding already from USAS. So
I'll take anything, and Park knows it. One thing I do want to make sure that we talk about is legal aid, free legal aid for people. I think that's important, and that's a really important priority that I have seen come up quite a bit. I don't know where that fits specifically in here, but I think we need to talk about it in some aspect. If legal aid is somehow restricted with their other funding, then we need to find some other organization that could be helpful.
I think that would be something in particular for us to look at in that second priority as we think about nonprofits and ways to support them. Maybe there's some emphasis we put on legal aid support, for example.
Yeah, there are a lot of nonprofits that could grow. Right now, they're just overwhelmed.
A quick question and a comment. Now, nowhere here there's the notion of education initiatives, and that's because the MNPS has their own pot money, right? Okay. I just thought-
So
Okay.
between the 3 stimulus packages, MNPS received funds in each one.
And a large amount on this one, last one.
Almost $500 million.
Yeah.
I think it's I might be off, about 485, 486, something like that.
Yeah.
Nearly 500 million.
That. So then my comment is this: I really like the notion of guiding principles, because of course we'll be talking about this for a long time. I guess my comment is, how are we making sure that we're being inclusive in capturing the guiding principles, that so that it's not the voices that are at the table that are going to be advocating for very, very valid projects and things. But is there a process that someone, I don't know if it's the mayor's office, if it's, that is taking place or has taken place around capturing really the notion of being inclusive in, like, what are the guiding principles that the city and the citizens of Davidson County care about, and how, and I know there's a balance that you have to strike, because if you say, hey, we have this, if you put it out there and we need input to see where you spend money, like, it'll be, by the end of the day, it'll be gone. So, but I'm just wondering how, if we're going to marry to some guiding principles, like, if there's a process of inclusivity that we feel comfortable with. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. We had a survey with the CARES Act. The Equity Alliance did a survey in the minority populations to look to see where the needs are. And so you're right on target. That was very helpful in our decisions, and it would be good to have something.
It was also helpful on the council floor when we presented these resolutions, and they were like, well, this is the evidence that supports why we think this is important, and that's how we got several council members to be completely on board. So we mentioned this at the last meeting. Is there a desire from the committee to go and have an organization complete another survey? Or maybe it doesn't even have to be a survey. Maybe it's, an online form or an online event that people could participate in. With COVID, you can't really do much in person anymore. But I'm in agreement. I think that there should be some type of
process? I don't know what the answer is. I don't know. And maybe if you've already corrected it, collected information, and that already exists, assumably you could argue that's still valid today. The needs 6 months ago are still valid today. I'm just one, but I'm not aware of that. And I don't know what the right process of it, but I think it would be important if I'm going to hang my hat on a set of guiding principles, that there's a sense within the stakeholders that everybody had a chance to.
There are a few different ways you all could think about that, and certainly I know council members have done some really creative things, I think, in terms of, especially in this time of COVID, it's a little bit more challenging to go out, right, and hold a community meeting, for example. But you could do community meetings. You could invite public input through either online or not forums. Our hub system can do surveys. And so for example, when we did the police chief search, we used that as a really great tool for putting out and asking people just a few questions about what would you want to see in a police chief, for example. And that was very helpful in and of itself as an input. So that's certainly some things to think about. The other thing that we didn't bring to the fore because we were a little bit worried about how fast data was changing, but now might be a better time. I've talked to Mary Jo about this. Is our social services department has a research function, and they gather data and do an annual report. Now, they just did an annual report. Some of their sources of data are a little older. Some of their sources of data are a little bit newer. But we could reach out to them and find out. They may be a little bit closer to being able to do statements of need right now than almost any other function because of that work that they have ongoing. And so if that's something of interest, we could ask Renee Pratt and her team to come and do a compilation for you on some of the data of what they're seeing as a set of needs. And it's really overall, even in normal times, I think it's a very shocking picture of poverty in our community if you haven't ever seen it before. So
that would be great to have her.
I think it'd be helpful to use the resources that are available. I don't think that the Equity Alliance report from last year, there's nothing that would make the findings different this year in terms of the priorities it posed and the key areas. Now, this is broader than those areas that we were focusing on, but I think getting that back in front of us, taking advantage of these other resources, I think would be a good first step.
I just think there's a lot of long-term planning that is possible with this funding that we've never seen before, like the ability to do affordable housing and the stormwater stuff and all of that. It's like this money is money that we wouldn't have seen for many years, and to be able to put those into the community and have those be long-term solutions, I want to make sure that we have community input on that.
So I have a couple of thoughts. Kristen and I have worked on, what some of the framework could look like for this first tranche. As a reminder, we do have 259. We've received the first half of that. Again, it's not a 2-year cycle though. It's really a 4 to 5 year cycle, on the spend. But we have looked at taking this guiding principle framework and then actually putting things in a spreadsheet with dollars. And some of it is urgent or things that are just, I don't want to say no-brainer, but things that we would probably all agree on in our longer term, affordable housing. Some of you may have heard that, the mayor wants to do an additional $10 million to Barnes Fund with these funds. Well, if we want to get those things going, we can bring a framework that has maybe items that you're like, yeah, we don't have to decide. There's a process for Barnes Fund. If we're just going to give 10 more, we can do that. Then there's things like, how do we fund nonprofits, that we need to come up with an application process. We need to then say, do we want to apply these principles to applications? Because we could get applications for everything from everyone. And there are a lot of nonprofits in Davidson County. So there are some things that I think we could get moving and some things that are longer term strategy and planning. Would it be helpful to have something to take a look at rather than just piecemealing it, you all may look at it and start to get an idea of where we think this could move and start picking off some of the priorities. And I'm kind of looking at Kristen to see if we're ready to do that.
I think we can bring that forward, understanding that some pieces are going to move even as we go, because departments might have suggested one thing, and you all both work it with us and discover that maybe more is needed or less
Yeah.
is needed. And that's totally fine if it just gives you guys something to work from and to
Starting
have
point,
it.
It's something
Bigger
to
picture.
chew on
It's a lot better to have
versus,
something to respond to.
Right. They come up-
And again, there will be no pride in it. I will treat it like we do the budget process in the sense that we can explain the logic of why we put something down, but then from there on, you guys are carrying it forward and
and you
thinking
may
through
say,
whether it makes
we
sense.
need
or
folks to
something.
come in and talk about it, but are we still good with once a month?
Yeah. I just want to really make sure that, I mean, I'm hoping that we're all on the same page as far as taking these dollars and really looking at them. I mean, obviously, we're going to have an emergency, like we have to do testing and that stuff like that, but to really make sure that this is a gift. What a gift. That we make sure that we make every single one of these dollars stretch as far as possible, and that means investment. Look at it as an investment so that we're reaping the benefits of these dollars for years and decades to come. So stormwater infrastructure or enhancing, hub, things that we already have in place, enhancing relationships that we already have with MOUs. Like, for example, I know that we have MOUs with Hands On Nashville. We've never allocated $1 to them, apparently, in our operating budget. And although they step up to the plate all the time for, to staff certain projects, and they've staffed things for COVID-related stuff, I would love to give them, $100,000 to them, which is nothing in comparison to $260 million, would change their whole, it would be amazing. Same thing with like CRC, which is the Community Resource Center, that you should go and see that. So there's things like that. I just want to look at it from an investment and longevity and parlaying those dollars into getting grants and sustainability and that kind of thing. So as long as we're looking at it from that perspective, I think it could be a game changer for Nashville as a whole.
And at our September meeting, I will be able to report back. We actually have a reporting period or date for August 31st. We have to submit our plan. Well, we don't have a plan. Most cities don't, because the recommendation was, don't create this big plan and appropriate all your funds until we have a final ruling from the Treasury, which is expected mid-September. So most cities don't have that. The guidance says, well, once you do, you have 60 days then to go back and update this. But I've been kind of plowing through the manual and the guidance as much as I can, and I'll really be digging into it now. So when we meet in September, some of this long-term planning and evidence-based, like when we say we're making an investment, we have to actually, it's not just reporting numbers like this OIG report that I showed from CARES Act. That was easy. Not really, but it feels like it now, because I've seen what some of this is, that we have to start matching. Why are you, putting money there? What is the evidence-based research? What's the evidence-based, results that you've seen in the past? What is your goal, and how do you think this is achieving it? So there's going to be a lot of that.
Yeah. See ya.
Sorry.
So, okay.
Sorry, I have to go.
You're good. Any other questions? We'll formally adjourn. All right. We are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Kristen, thank you.
Thank you.
Happy, I think we'll be spending time together.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.